Thank you very much, Shelley. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll go ahead and get started right away. Almost all of our presentations, and it's really to show what the vision is for the retail solution. I like to point out that the vision hasn't changed. So if you've been attending these sessions or others over the last 3 or plus years, this slide really hasn't changed. You've seen it many times before, and we're staying true to that vision, and with each release, we're delivering on that vision. So we're adding to the components to be able to complete the vision, and we're improving the existing components that are there. And the overall general idea is that the vision is that it's a complete retail solution, omni-channel solution, from brick and mortar to web to mobile, call center, from front end to back end. So the main investment pillars for CU8, you've probably seen this before as well, is mobility and the modern point of sale clients. So those were released in R3 as beta, and so this effort is to bring those to kind of RTM quality or production quality. Additional investments in e-commerce. We'll talk a bit more about what those are. Mainly support for third-party e-commerce. Extensibility improvements. Again, this is a bit across the board, but with a heavy emphasis on the modern POS clients. And enterprise deployment. So this is something that we, has kind of been sorely needed in the solution for a long time, and we made our first investment in that in R3. And this is kind of taking enterprise deployment and monitoring to the next level. So I'll go into each of these in a bit more detail. Clearly, the largest bucket in the area of the most investment for CU8 is the modern POS client. We released it in R3 as beta, as I mentioned, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from that, which is great, and a lot of that feedback from those of you that are on the call. We've done internal testing, we've done usability testing, and we're taking those learnings, and over this release and the coming releases, we'll continue to make the client better and better for the best possible experience. So one of the big areas of improvements were around usability. So we got a lot of feedback before. So at the time that we were developing the client in the R3 time period, Windows 8 apps were relatively new. Windows 8 itself and the kind of the ecosystem of apps around it was still being kind of fleshed out. We snapped to those guidelines very strictly for the R3 release. And I think there's a lot of good stuff from there, but other apps as well as ours have kind of evolved as we get more and more feedback from users. So you'll see improvements, not just visual improvements of kind of fit and finish and polish, but usability improvements around navigation. We've gotten a lot of over and over feedback of no hidden buttons, and I think this is kind of Windows 8 feedback all up, is that most people aren't a big fan of the app bar and how it shows and hides. It's something that you can learn pretty quickly, but when you're staring at a screen, you don't know what to do next. It's better to have. We found that it's a lot better to have those actions on the canvas all the time. So we've done work around that. We've improved our product browsing story quite a bit, and I'll demo that for you later, as well as the ability to have search refinements. So we'll have keyword search, as well as the ability to use the same refiners that are available in the online channel and use those in the store. So if you're looking for products within a certain price range or with certain specifications, you can use refiners to narrow the search there. And then a bit more around kind of that fit and finish and polish, as we've cleaned up some of the major pages, including the customer and product details pages, and we've improved the product comparison page. Next is around topology changes. So one of the key things that was missing in the R3 time period was offline support. So we know how important this is for retailers, and we weren't able to deliver on that in the R3 beta time period, but offline support is included in CU8. And as we go into more details about that too, I'll explain how we do that. Part of that actually allows us also some additional topology choices, which is basically a retail serverless deployment. So in an in-store deployment, the new modern clients have the ability to run as a rich client, much like the enterprise POS does. So in the R3 time period, they were thinner clients and they required retail server. And then obviously, where the retail server is a whole other set of deployment choices, whether that's in the store or private cloud or wherever that retail server is. Basically that hasn't changed. But what we've done is we've introduced the ability to have a retail serverless deployment in the store. This has been, not only work from our team, but work from the Windows team also, and allowing, the modern apps or the Windows 8 apps to actually be able to communicate with the desktop. So in the first versions of Windows 8, there was a very strict kind of line of demarcation of these client apps working with the desktop and accessing desktop resources or APIs and whatnot. And so that's been lifted in Windows 8.1, and that's allowed us to do additional things, including offline and kind of these retail serverless deployments. We've also heard from a lot of users that they want each individual register to kind of work and as a standalone. So depending on how long you've been with us, if you go all the way back to AX 2009 in our first releases of retail, that was actually the only choice, is that each register was its own island. So sometimes we'll call this island deployment or island mode, but it's really each register is standalone. And that gives you kind of, really good resiliency. However, it's limiting when we talk about kind of cross terminal scenarios or, some other things that we talk about are, single version of the truth. But we've actually reintroduced that as a deployment option should that fit a particular retailer's needs. So example of kind of cross-terminal scenarios that wouldn't be enabled if you chose this type of a deployment would be suspending a transaction on one register and resuming it on another, right? So if each one is its own island or each one has its own channel, its own version of the channel database, then sharing that data across them is no longer possible. And then the single version of the truth scenario is basically, since they are all reading from their own database, it's possible that either one database could get updated slightly after another, or there could be some issue where a database isn't getting updated, and therefore you could end up with things like different prices in one register or another. But again, we've heard this from partners and retailers, that this is a deployment option that they feel comfortable with. It works with their infrastructure and their needs. So that capability is here, again, with the modern POS clients. And again, the ability to have this kind of serverless deployment enables that as well. Around hardware and shift management. So Hardware Station was introduced in R3, but in its beta form, it was a bit incomplete. Somewhat around of its configuration, somewhat around the devices that it supported, and maybe most importantly around the business flows of it. So we had the ability, physically for multiple terminals to share the same cache drawer, but from a business perspective, there was really no such support for that. So how you would balance your drawer or have any kind of, cache management within that was kind of missing in the R3 time period. So we've introduced the concept of cache drawer pools, which allow shared shifts. So what this is it basically, allows multiple devices, say maybe 3 or 4 tablets out on the floor, all to use one cache drawer. And so to do that, that becomes one shift that allows multiple people to use. We've had the ability in the past for a user to use someone else's shift, so a manager could log in and use a cashier's shift if they wanted to, but that was still kind of one at a time. So any given shift could only be accessed by someone one at a time. You'd have to suspend and resume shifts or log in and log out for someone to use the same shift. So this will actually allow multiple users to utilize the same shift all at the same time. So this is great for kind of the mobility story. This is great for hardware station story, but we've also heard feedback from retailers that cache is such a small portion of their business nowadays that cache management isn't as important to them as it used to be, and so they just want one shift to close at the end of the night. They don't want to have to go around closing multiple shifts. So this would allow for that scenario also. And then finally, and this kind of goes along with the UI improvements as well, but just to call it out separately, you probably noticed in the R3 time period that we really only supported one resolution with the modern client. So it was 1366 by 768, and that was fine for a lot of tablets that were on the market at the time. But there's new hardware all the time, and we know that this isn't only for mobile solutions. This can certainly be deployed on a traditional desktop PC as well. So we knew that we couldn't be limited to just a single resolution there. So we support app scaling now, with exception, and I'll talk about that a bit as well. And then support for portrait mode. So you can pivot the screen to work in portrait as well as landscape. Around e-commerce, our investment is really mainly around this, the second bullet point. So obviously, superior out-of-the-box shopping experience has been, our key pillar in this area from the beginning, and we make improvements to that in every release. But the majority of the work here has been in separating out a lot of the retail pieces from SharePoint so that they can be consumed, by others, by third parties. Excuse me. So in this case, a lot of the work was done specifically for an integration with Sitecore, but that abstraction allows you to now do this with other platforms as well. So what that means is the publishing portions of the solution that we had before was previously tied very closely to SharePoint, and now there's a publishing connector that can be used to publish to, again, third-party platforms or solutions. And that's both channel data and catalog data. And then from a checkout service. So basically in the previous releases, we built checkout components or controls on top of SharePoint, and they were only able to be used within SharePoint. And so now what we've done is we've abstracted those pieces as well so that they can be consumed by other platforms. So the shopping cart, the mini shopping cart, basically the whole order placement aspect can now be integrated and utilized in third-party solutions. So obviously the SharePoint solution is still there, and that's kind of the superior out-of-the-box solution. But through integration and extensibility, we can now take the investments done in e-commerce and use that in additional platforms. We've gotten a lot of feedback and requests for that as well. Moving into extensibility, again, this is largely around the modern POS client, or MPOS as we'll call it. So we've added support for UI customization. So this is one of the big areas that was missing from feature parity with Enterprise POS, was the ability to utilize a custom control in the UI, and then not only that, but to account for it during your UI configuration in the back office. So as you're doing your screen layout or your till layout, you can actually specify where this custom control is going to be. And that was in ePOS before, but now it's also within MPOS. Also, the ability to have custom fields, labels, and whatnot, that's in ePOS is also now in MPOS. From an extensibility perspective, so obviously the entire source code for the modern POS client is provided. Excuse me, pardon me, I have a bit of a cold. Probably the more that I talk, the more that I'm going to cough. So I apologize for that. So we've done a lot to improve extensibility, though, without having to dig deep directly into all the source code, which then has kind of maintenance and serviceability issues. So kind of the ultimate flexibility and power, but at a cost. So adopting a bit more of the ePOS approach is the ability to have triggers and support for blank operations. So this will allow you to extend the code without having to change the existing code. And that goes not only from workflows, but to entities as well. So additional properties on an entity, such as a product or a customer, are certainly possible as well. And then obviously, if you're doing these things, this allows you to add completely new functionality. So you can change a workflow, or you can add completely new integrations or workflows. And finally, for Windows Phone, I believe this was announced before, but in case you didn't know, the Windows Phone app will still be in beta at this point, but that will be included in the SDK as beta. So that's obviously it's all the source code as it was before, but also an out-of-the-box deployable Zap file. So for demos, for trying it out, whatnot, you don't need to compile it and deploy it to your phone. You can just deploy it. So it does require an unlocked phone, but you can deploy the without having to make any major changes there, and that's great for being able to evaluate it and provide feedback to us. Enterprise deployment. So the mass deployment and monitoring that we did with SCOM and SCCM last time, we continue to invest here. So some of the things that we've done is kind of almost usability improvements to this also. So a lot of the steps that were manual before, or there were a lot of steps to them, we've tried to streamline that and allow that to be done in bulk. So deploying the certificates that are required for all the IIS-based components is now capable to be done through mass deployment. I mentioned bulk, so you can do bulk topology import into SCCM and support for localized versions of SCCM. From a monitoring perspective, we've added kind of the support for the hardware station component so that you can get kind of health information from that as well. And then finally, from an upgrade perspective, short of reading all of these out, CU8 is an upgrade. So the expected deployment is to start with one of these versions of AX and then upgrade to CU8. So it's not it's not a single install as you would say with a R3 or with a major release version of AX. So you would start with one of these versions and then apply the CU8 upgrade to it. With that, I'm going to jump into a short little demo of the Modern POS tablet changes that we've made, and then we can kind of open it up for questions. Okay. So just for sake of for the link meeting here, I am still running it in the simulator, but you'll see, and I'll show you that it can now run in different resolutions. So the need to do that isn't as great as it was in R3. I'll go ahead and log in. So I mentioned before, this is it's an early build, and there's definitely still some issues that we're finding in it. I'll also mention that I'm actually using this build to build the new demo data and till layouts and all that. So you may see some work in progress from that perspective also. But this is logging into the modern client. You'll see that this is set up for the Fabricam demo data. So at the time of the VM that's going to be made available, we'll have this available for both Fabricam, which is apparel, as well as Contoso, which is electronics. And we've got very similar to before, only we've kind of given it a fresh look and feel for the welcome screen capability. So again, if you're not that familiar with it, welcome screen is store, register, and role based, just like a screen layout is. But this gives the user kind of a landing page to come into that's kind of non-transactional typically. So if you're going to be doing other things than selling, then this gives you a place to jump off from there. If you're doing inventory, if you're looking at reporting or whatnot, then you can do that from the welcome screen. Or you can go into the main transaction screen for your core point of sale capabilities. The biggest thing you'll probably notice different here is the left navigation piece over on the side. This supports the theming as well. So in the visual profiles, we have dark and light theme. So this is the dark theme. That's why it's basically black background with light text, or you can go with a light background and dark text, and then the various colors that we have for the accent color. And the accent color is picked up by a lot of the command buttons, some of the kind of hyperlinks that you'll see throughout, as well as the left nav bar. The left nav bar will allow you to go back to your welcome screen or your home screen with this button up here, and then into the transaction screen, kind of with the shopping bag logo down here. So this will allow you to move back and forth between those two screens. In R3, remember it was the nav bar that worked a lot like the app bar. So you would have to swipe up or from the bottom or right click to be able to navigate. And so this brings this navigation directly onto the screen, much easier to discover and much easier to use. It can be hidden, it can be turned off. So kind of this icon up at the top will show or hide this, which will either give you a cleaner look if that's what you're going for, or if for some reason that real estate is more important, you can show and hide that. We've also brought search into here. So now you can search directly from the left nav pane. So we do still support the unified search that's built into Windows. That still works through the charms. But again, this is kind of an easier, more integrated way of being able to search. And you can search across customers and products here. Browsing would be category browsing, which is kind of what was in place in R3. Or we have a new kind of tree view to be able to browse categories. So this allows you to, one's more of a visual drill down, and the other is more of a traditional tree view. And selecting kind of top nodes will give you all of the products within that category. Or you can pivot to the categories view and see the categories that are within that one. So again, it's still the tree. You've still got categories and subcategories. And you can navigate either directly through the categories or using the tree view that's up here. The next one down is the filters or the refiners. So what this will allow you to do is, take a search results, or if you browse to a particular category, and apply additional filters to them. And I have to apologize that the demo data as of right now only has the two default filters. So basically, we'll always be able to filter by category, and we'll always be able to filter by price. The rest is based off of the user's data. So depending on the category, a product will have certain attributes, and those attributes can be used to refine. So if this was a camera, you could look for cameras within a certain range of megapixels or sensor size. Or if it was a laptop, you could look at battery life or the amount of memory or something like that. So like I said, in this particular build that I have in the demo data that I'm building, it's just the two defaults. But basically, you could add one or more categories to filter on. You can add price range. So if you want to filter this for products only within a particular price range. And then you could continue to add should you have something more than that. Is it Energy Star compliant, or what's the thread count, or whatever else that is. And then applying those filters will further refine the search, or in this case, I was just browsing, basically the results that are shown there. I mentioned before that product comparison has been reworked a bit. It's largely visual, but we found that we were able to have a kind of a better layout by rearranging the controls and having them top to bottom instead of left to right, and that allows us to have additional and more information on the screen at the same time. So product comparison has been reworked, as well as the product details. So going into the product details will allow you to view any of the specifications or attributes, which would include those refiners, your related products. We've also added, you'll notice that the app bar is up by default now. So you'll either see, common actions directly on the canvas. And this goes to the no hidden buttons comment that I made earlier. You'll see more and more things on the canvas. And then, more secondary or more traditional navigation would still be the app bar, but the app bar will be up by default. So you won't have to swipe or right-click to get the app bar to come up. And we've also made some minor improvements of being able to, add the item to the sale but stay where you are. or sell it now. And so I'll actually show you a quick example of what that means. If I just kind of go back to my screen here, let's say I wanted to add this cotton polo to the sale, but I don't necessarily want to go to the checkout screen right now because I'm not done. I can add this to the sale. It comes in different sizes, colors, and styles, so it'll prompt me for that. But then notice over here, that product gets added to the sale. You get a little indicator. It shows that there's one product on the transaction, but I've stayed right here. So now I can continue doing what I want to do. I can change the refiners. I can browse to another category and add another product without having to start my navigation all over again, which is something that would happen in R3. You browse to a particular category, add your item, and now if you wanted to add a second one, you had to browse all the way back there again. So now we have the add to sale and sell now. So if I chose sell now, it would be more similar to the functionality that's in R3. I'll still make my selections, but adding it will then bring me to the transaction screen as well. Transaction screen is largely the same as it was in R3, although we have done some bug fixes and more fit and finish and getting things to align and lay out properly. So there's definitely those type of enhancements made throughout. When we talk about screen size, so let me actually, I'm going to go all the way back here. I'll complete this sale. And then I'll log out. Oh. See there? So in my simulator, I can actually change my screen resolution. So in this case, it's the 1366 by 768 that we've seen before. If I wanted to run not only at a different resolution, but I could run at a different aspect ratio. So let's say I change to a 4:3 aspect ratio instead. You'll see that the app will support that. So actually, I'm running Windows 10, and when you switch the resolution, it makes you go back into full screen again. But I don't know if that's intentional or if that's a Windows 10 issue. But you can see now that the login screen is now sized to fit the resolution that I set it to, and as does the contents within the screen. So that's any of the lists or any of the tiles. So any of the pages here, including any of the details pages, are all going to scale to fit. There's one exception, and that's the transaction screen. So the transaction screen through the designer is for a specific layout. So you'll still have to do your till layouts for a given screen resolution, but the rest of the app will size and scale based on pretty much any form factor or resolution. So here you'll see that this is now scrolling, where you probably wouldn't want that on your transaction screen, at least not in most cases. Although maybe you could think of a way to work that to your advantage. I'm going to go back and switch back to 1366 by 768. And then we can also do portrait. So by switching this here, you'll see that the login screen will now support portrait. Going into my welcome screen, you'll see that the content now will realign. You'll see this in a lot of cases. It'll either fill to the bottom if it's a list, or it'll be panoramic and still scroll to the right, or we'll actually relay out the page based on the orientation. And now one thing we've done here is in your till layouts, we actually do allow for secondary till layouts. So when you're designing your till layout in AX, you'll design a layout for landscape and you'll design a layout for portrait. In this way, you can optimize it, the content based on your needs and based on the orientation of the device. If I switch here, this should switch me back into my landscape. Okay, so with that, I'll go back to the slides real quick. There's a couple of kind of housekeeping slides around the program itself. We can move through these pretty quickly, but basically, especially given where we are in the release, there's a CTB VM that's available now. I wouldn't expect another update to that between now and RTM. Obviously, all of the information that's available on Connect will remain there through the end, including the scenario documents. So we continue to value your feedback. So, obviously I mentioned before that we're at the time now where we're making scoping decisions and we're making the final improvements. But clearly, if a extremely high severity bug is found, then that would be something that we would likely address before the CU8 release. Or if it's lower severity, it's still good for us to have that feedback for hot fixing. So it might not make it into the CU8 release, but based on its priority and severity, we can often have hot fixes in the works that would be available sooner. Or if it's just feedback and suggestions, we'll continue to improve on this app and in fact the entire solution. So we always want to have that feedback that we'll be getting.